Serena, you are a poor orphan with no money, no name, and no place in the future I'm building. Cade Mercer, the 35-year-old founder of Mercer Strategic Resources and Serena's husband of 8 years, said it before cameras at the reception celebrating his permanent return after 5 years of overseas assignments. Serena Vale, the 32-year-old hidden billionaire CEO of Aurelian Energy Holdings and Cade's devoted wife, had come expecting a reunion. Instead, Cade had invited her so his public rejection could become part of his new image. Beside him stood Vexa Sterling, the 31-year-old image consultant, Cade's secret lover, and the woman preparing to replace Serena. Vexa held Cade's arm while Brant Hollow, her 34-year-old image manager and ally, directed photographers to present them as Mercer Strategic's new power couple. Cade looked at Serena. I should have ended this mistake years ago. You contributed nothing to my rise. I only carried you because I pitied you. Ronan Pike, Mercer Strategic's 42-year-old chief financial officer and Cade's corporate ally, lowered his eyes. Investors whispered, but nobody defended Serena while Cade erased 8 years of marriage. On a glass table lay the reception program. Beneath Cade's photograph, Vexa was named his official partner. Serena's name appeared nowhere. Serena folded the program once and placed it before Cade. That small action made his betrayal more real than any argument. She did not scream or beg. She asked, "Is this what you truly believe?" When Cade answered, "It's what everyone can see," Serena understood that the man she had loved had chosen status over loyalty. Cade returned to Vexa, raised his glass, and toasted the coming Aurelian sponsorship. He believed Serena had no lawyer, money, family, or influence to challenge him. Vexa kissed his cheek, certain she had replaced a helpless orphan. But Cade did not know Serena secretly controlled and led Aurelian Energy Holdings, the private $10 billion oil company sponsoring his firm. Her ownership was protected through the Vale Trust. Publicly, she was known only as S. Vale. While Cade worked abroad, Serena had opened opportunities, rescued his payroll, and approved independent commercial investments whenever his company nearly collapsed. Cade believed he was self-made. He never knew his wife was the invisible strength beneath his rise. Worse, Mercer Strategic had borrowed heavily against the expected Aurelian contract. Cade had falsely declared himself unmarried on due diligence forms, spent borrowed funds on Vexa's image campaign, and assured lenders the sponsorship was effectively guaranteed. Without final board approval and Serena's controlling owner consent, the contract could not close. If the deal failed, multiple loan covenants allowed lenders to freeze credit and demand repayment Mercer Strategic could not afford. 2 days later, Cade entered Aurelian's boardroom with Vexa, smiling for cameras. Serena sat quietly near the back while Graham Wexler, Aurelian's 61-year-old chairman and Serena's trusted protector, placed a presentation copy of the contract before him. Before Cade's pen touched the page, Graham stopped him. The board must correct several false statements and reveal who truly owns this company. The screen changed to the Vale Trust records. Every director stood and turned toward Serena. Cade thought he had dumped a penniless orphan. He had humiliated the billionaire owner of the company keeping his firm alive, and the board was about to remove the support holding up his loans, investors, and reputation. Stay until the end to see how the signing drives Cade into bankruptcy, watch Vexa and his allies abandon him, and witness Serena turn silent loyalty into lawful justice. Subscribe for more emotional justice stories and comment SEINA if humility should never be mistaken for weakness. The private elevator stopped so suddenly that Serena Vale nearly lost her balance. The lights above her flickered once. Then the emergency alarm screamed. Serena tightened her grip on the old leather folder pressed against her chest. Inside were conflict disclosures, trust records, and one controlling owner authorization that could allow her husband's company to receive a 9-figure sponsorship or prevent the agreement from moving forward. The elevator had frozen between the 87th and 88th floors of Aurelian Energy Holdings. For 3 long seconds, Serena heard nothing except the alarm and her own heartbeat. Then the speaker above her crackled. "Madam, please remain calm. The system is resetting." Serena did not answer. At 32, Serena Vale was the controlling owner and chief executive officer of Aurelian Energy Holdings, a privately held $10 billion oil company operating across several countries. Aurelian's board and senior leadership knew her. Public ownership records named the Vale Trust, while company materials identified the reclusive chief executive only as S. Vale. She was also the wife of a man who believed she had no money, no influence, and no family powerful enough to protect her. The elevator jerked upward. Its doors finally opened. Serena stepped into the executive hallway without complaint. She wore a plain gray dress beneath a dark coat. There were no diamonds, designer logos, or visible security team behind her. The only valuable object she carried openly was her grandfather's worn leather folder. A young executive blocked her path. He looked no older than 28. His expensive suit was too tight across his shoulders, and his newly transferred strategy executive badge shone under the lights. It was his first week at headquarters. "I'm sorry," he said, looking Serena up and down. "This floor is restricted. Assistants use the service elevators." Serena stopped. She was used to this. People often looked at her simple clothing and decided what she was before she spoke. Some saw an assistant. Others saw a woman in the wrong building. Almost nobody outside Aurelian's senior ranks saw the person whose approval controlled projects and careers inside the tower. Serena lowered her eyes to the young man's badge. "Your first week at headquarters?" she asked. His face tightened. "That has nothing to do with—" The boardroom doors opened behind him. Every conversation inside ended. Every director rose from their chair. Graham Wexler, 61, was Aurelian's chairman and the man Serena's grandfather had trusted to protect the company until she was ready to lead it. He stepped forward, his expression formal but warm. "Good morning, Madam CEO." The young executive turned pale. Serena gave him no angry speech. She did not demand an apology or threaten his job. "Next time," she said quietly, "ask who someone is before deciding where they belong." Then she walked past him. That was how Serena used power. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Inside the boardroom, the long glass table reflected the cold morning sky. All field maps covered one wall. Financial reports filled another screen. At the far end of the room, Serena's chair waited beneath the silver Aurelian emblem. Leora Venn, 29, was Serena's executive assistant and closest professional ally. She had worked beside Serena for 6 years and guarded her privacy with fierce loyalty. Leora placed a cup of tea beside Serena's chair, then collected the leather folder from her. "You came alone again," Leora said. "I used the private entrance. Security does not need to follow me into every room." Leora glanced toward the hallway. "Sometimes the people in the room are the reason you need security." Serena almost smiled. Across the table sat Marcel Dane, 45, Serena's private attorney, and the only person outside Aurelian's highest leadership who knew every detail of her marriage. He wore a dark suit and had the patient expression of a man who had warned Serena about the same danger many times. Marcel pushed a document toward her. "Mercer Strategic Resources has requested final sponsorship approval. The Independent Commercial Committee has completed its review. Because the exposure exceeds the board's threshold, the agreement still requires final board authorization and your consent as controlling owner." Serena's fingers paused above the paper. Mercer Strategic Resources belonged to Cade Mercer, 35, Serena's husband of 8 years. Cade had spent most of the last 5 years on overseas assignments, returning less often as his company expanded. He had not been home in 18 months. Serena had believed in his future before Cade had money, investors, or an office with his name on the door. She had met him when he was struggling to pay for professional courses. Back then, he wore the same 2 shirts to interviews and counted every dollar before buying lunch. Yet he had never been ashamed to walk beside her. He had loved her, or she believed he had, when he thought she was simply an orphan with no inheritance and no powerful family. Serena had allowed him to believe that. She told him she worked in administration for a private investment office, which was true, but never explained that the office existed to manage her own trust. Her parents died when she was 9. Afterward, she moved between relatives and private schools, watched from a distance by lawyers she did not understand. People called her an orphan, and technically they were right, but they did not know about her grandfather. Edmund Vale had built Aurelian Energy through decades of careful expansion. Before he died, he placed its controlling shares behind private trusts, holding companies, and legal protections. His goal was not to hide unlawful money. It was to protect Serena from people who might marry, manipulate, or harm her to gain access to it. When Serena married Cade, she kept those walls in place. She was not ashamed of her wealth. She was afraid of what wealth could do to love. Cade had once held her hand outside a courthouse and promised that success would never change him. Serena believed him so deeply that she risked millions to protect his dreams, but always through independent reviews, ordinary commercial terms, and directors who could refuse her request. Mercer's Strategic had nearly collapsed 3 times overseas. The first time, a major investor withdrew days before payroll. Serena asked an Aurelian-linked fund to review the company, and it provided emergency capital after independent approval. The second time, Cade lost access to a critical supplier. Serena asked Graham to arrange a private introduction without revealing her name. The third time, Mercer's Strategic faced a debt crisis. Serena authorized another holding company to consider an investment, again on documented commercial terms. Cade believed he had survived through skill and determination. Serena never corrected him. His pride mattered to her, perhaps more than her own need to be recognized. Marcel watched her study the sponsorship request. "Serena," he said gently, "love should not require you to disappear." Her eyes remained on Cade's company name. "He loved me before the money," she answered. "I need to know that man is still there." No one spoke for a moment. Then Leora approached with another file. "This came with the founder's due diligence packet," she said. Compliance flagged the personal guarantee section. Serena opened it. The application contained projections, ownership declarations, debt schedules, and disclosures signed by Cade. His signature was strong and confident at the bottom of every page. She turned to the section marked marital status of founder and guarantor. One box had been checked. Single. Serena stared at the word until the letters blurred. She did not cry. She did not ask whether it was a mistake. Cade had signed beneath it and certified the disclosure as complete. Slowly, she closed the file. Marcel's expression hardened. If he lied about something this easy to verify, there may be more. Serena looked toward the framed photograph on the cabinet beside her. It showed Cade years earlier, smiling beside her before success had placed distance in his eyes. "Then we need to know what else he has erased," she whispered. Outside the boardroom, morning light spread across the glass tower. Far away, Cade was preparing to return home, and beside him was a woman Serena had not yet learned to fear. 4 years earlier, Cade Mercer's company was 48 hours away from collapse when he called his wife. It was after midnight. Serena stood alone in Aurelian Energy's dark boardroom, holding the phone so tightly that its edge pressed into her palm. Through the glass walls, hundreds of office lights shone below her, but Cade's frightened breathing filled the room. "The investor pulled out," he said. "Payroll is due Friday. If I cannot pay my staff, Mercer's Strategic is finished." His voice broke on the last word. Serena closed her eyes. She had heard Cade worried before but never defeated. He had always carried his ambition like armor. Even when he had little money, he walked as if the future had already promised him something. Now that confidence was gone. "I don't know how to fix this," he admitted. Serena wanted to tell him the truth. She wanted to say she could cover every salary, every debt, and every unfinished project without damaging even a small part of her fortune. She wanted to tell him he did not have to carry the fear alone. Instead, she asked, "How much time do you have?" 2 days. "Then do not give up tonight." Cade released a weak laugh. "You always make things sound simple." "They are not simple," Serena said, "but you are not finished." After the call ended, Serena remained beside the windows. Cade's reflection disappeared from the black phone screen, leaving only her own face. She remembered another day when he had looked afraid of the future. Years earlier, they had stood outside a small courthouse after marrying in a quiet ceremony. There had been no crowd, expensive flowers, or family celebration. Serena wore a simple cream dress. Cade's suit had been borrowed from a friend. He had been broke, but he had been sincere. Rain started falling as they stepped outside. Cade took Serena's hands and pulled her beneath the narrow courthouse roof. "One day, I'll build something so strong nobody can ever look down on us," he promised. Serena smiled. "Nobody's opinion matters to me." "It matters to me," he replied. "You deserve more than this." He said it with love then, not shame. Serena believed he wanted to give her comfort. She did not understand that part of Cade had always feared being seen as poor. That fear once pushed him to work harder. Later, it would teach him to despise anything that reminded him of where he began. Back in Aurelian's boardroom, Serena called Marcel Dane, her private attorney. He answered after the second ring. "Is Cade in trouble?" he asked. "His investor withdrew. He cannot make payroll." Marcel was silent for a moment. "This is his first major crisis since he moved abroad. If you intervene, it must be reviewed like any other investment." "I know. You also cannot keep rescuing a man who does not know he is being rescued. He has employees who will lose their jobs. And that is the only reason you are helping." Serena did not answer immediately. Marcel understood the silence. Within hours, he created a lawful path through one of Aurelian's smaller investment companies. Independent officers reviewed Mercer Strategic's contracts, cash flow, and recovery plan. The fund agreed to provide emergency capital under ordinary commercial terms, with interest, reporting duties, and repayment protections. Cade would see only the investment company's name. Serena's identity would remain protected by the Veil Trust. Serena made sure Cade's company was not given free money. She wanted to help him survive, not create a false business that could stand only because she loved its owner. 46 hours later, Mercer Strategic's accounts received the funds. Cade called Serena with excitement in his voice. "You will not believe what happened," he said. "A private fund reviewed our work and stepped in." Serena sat quietly behind her desk. "That is wonderful. I knew someone would recognize what I built." Serena felt a small ache beneath her ribs. She could have told him that she had recognized it first. Instead, she said, "I always knew you could save the company." That afternoon, Cade gathered his overseas team and told them, "I knew I could pull this off." The employees applauded. With every rescue, his confidence grew, so did the distance between him and Serena. At first, he called every night. During the first 3 years abroad, he came home twice for short visits and asked Serena to be patient until the company stabilized. Then the visits stopped. Calls fell to 3 times a week, then once a week. During the final 18 months, Serena began checking the time difference before calling, only to receive short messages saying he was in meetings. His clothes changed. His voice changed. Even the backgrounds behind him during video calls changed, from a small rented office to private lounges, luxury hotels, and rooms filled with powerful people. He began correcting Serena's words during conversations. He suggested she buy more expensive clothes for the day he brought her to an industry event. Once, when she appeared on screen wearing an old sweater he used to love, he frowned. "You still have that?" Serena looked down at it. "You gave it to me. That was years ago." The words were harmless on their own, but the way he said them made Serena feel as if the sweater and everything connected to their old life embarrassed him. 8 months before Cade's return, he attended an energy industry reception overseas. That was where Vexa Sterling first approached him. Vexa Sterling, 31, was a strategic image consultant who helped ambitious executives improve their public reputation. She would soon become Cade's secret lover, though that night she introduced herself only as someone who could make powerful people notice him. She had watched Cade across the room before speaking to him. He wore an expensive watch purchased after Mercer Strategic's latest funding round. Senior oil executives greeted him by name because Aurelian-connected partners had quietly opened doors for him. Vexa saw access, insecurity, and rising status. She did not see Serena behind any of it. Beside Vexa stood Brant Hollow, 34, her image manager and trusted ally. Brant arranged invitations, controlled photographs, and made sure Vexa appeared beside the right people at the right time. "That one," Vexa told him after Cade joined a group of executives. "Find out whether his company is as strong as his reputation." Brant studied Cade. "Married, wife never appears at industry events." Vexa's smile did not change. "Happy? Hard to tell, he barely mentions her." "Then find out what he wants people to believe." Later that night, Vexa introduced herself to Cade. She praised his company, his watch, and the way important executives listened when he spoke. Cade enjoyed the attention. She made him feel as if he already belonged among billionaires. Within weeks, Mercer Strategic hired her to reshape its public image. Within months, the professional dinners became private, the private meetings became an affair, and Cade stopped wearing his wedding ring abroad. Back in the present, Serena remained in her office with Cade's full sponsorship disclosure closed before her. Leora Venn, Serena's executive assistant, entered carrying a tablet. "There is something else," she said. She placed the screen in front of Serena. The photograph had been posted by an industry guest 2 nights earlier. Cade sat at a private restaurant table with several executives. Vexa was beside him, leaning close. Her shoulder touched his. Cade's hand rested at the back of her chair near her waist. It was not proof of an affair, but it was not the distance of 2 ordinary colleagues. Serena enlarged the image. Cade was smiling in a way she had not seen during their calls for years. "Do you know her?" Leora asked. "No, her name is Vexa Sterling. She has attended nearly every major event with him for the past 8 months. Mercer Strategic pays her as an image consultant." Serena stared at the screen, searching Cade's face for the man who once stood beside her in the rain. Her phone vibrated. A message from Cade appeared. "I'm coming back for good. We need to talk about our future." Hope rose before Serena could stop it. Perhaps he wanted to explain. Perhaps the disclosure was an error. Perhaps the photograph showed nothing more than a professional relationship. For one dangerous second, she smiled. Far away, Cade sat in the back of a luxury car with Vexa beside him. She reached across, straightened his tie, and let her fingers remain against his chest. "Remember," she said softly, "you cannot build an empire with an orphan standing next to you, not after investors have bought the self-made story." Cade looked out of the window. He did not defend his wife, and for the first time, he did not look troubled by the silence. The first camera flash struck Serena's face before she understood she had walked into a trap. For one sharp second, she could not see. Then the room returned around her in pieces, crystal lights, black suits, raised glasses, and dozens of strangers turning to stare. Cade's invitation described a small welcome home gathering after his final overseas assignment. Serena expected employees, a few partners, and perhaps a private conversation with the husband she had not seen in 18 months. Instead, she had entered a public image launch. A gold sign above the stage read, "Welcome Home, Cade Mercer." The future of energy strategy photographers stood near the front. Investors filled the room. Executives from several firms gathered around tall glass tables. Every detail had been planned for publicity, including Serena's arrival. She stood near the entrance in a modest black dress, elegant but simple. Her hair was pulled back. Her wedding ring was the only jewelry she wore. No one came to welcome her. A woman near the coat desk looked Serena over and whispered to her companion, "Is that the charity woman Cade supported before he became successful?" The words reached Serena clearly. Her feet stopped. Charity woman, not wife, not partner. Not the woman who had waited through 5 years of distance while quietly keeping his company alive. Brandt had already given the room a version of her before she arrived. Cade had not merely forgotten to mention Serena. He had rewritten her. Across the room, Leora Venn, Serena's 29-year-old executive assistant and closest professional ally, stood beside representatives attending under the name of an Aurelian subsidiary. Serena had asked her to come because the invitation felt wrong. Leora now watched closely, ready to move if Serena gave the slightest signal. Serena gave none. Then Cade appeared at the top of the short staircase beside the stage. He wore a dark tailored suit, a silver watch, and the confident smile he used in business photographs. The thin, worried man Serena once knew had disappeared beneath polish and applause. Vexa stood beside him. Vexa Sterling, 31, was Mercer Strategic's image consultant, Cade's secret lover, and the woman he intended to present as his new partner. Her dress shone beneath the lights. One hand rested against Cade's arm, not like an employee helping a client, but like a woman showing the room where she belonged. Brandt Hollow, Vexa's 34-year-old image manager and ally, walked a few steps behind them, directing photographers with small movements of his hand. A fourth person followed Cade onto the stage. Ronan Pike, 42, was Mercer Strategic's chief financial officer and Cade's most trusted corporate ally. Ronan managed the company's finances, approved major spending, and helped Cade present the firm as stronger than it truly was. Ronan glanced toward Serena. Recognition crossed his face, followed by discomfort. He looked away. That small act told Serena more than an apology could have. He knew she was Cade's wife. He also knew what Cade planned to do. The music stopped. Cade took the microphone. "When I left 5 years ago," he began, "Mercer Strategic was only an idea." The guests turned toward him. Serena remained near the back, her hands folded quietly in front of her. Cade thanked the investors who had trusted his vision. He thanked Ronan for protecting the company's finances during difficult years. He thanked Brandt for transforming Mercer Strategic into a respected public brand. Then he turned toward Vexa. "And I want to thank Vexa Sterling," he said, his voice warming, "for standing beside me during the most important stage of my rise." Vexa smiled as the room applauded. Serena waited. Cade continued speaking about sacrifice, courage, and the people who had supported him. Her name never came. She remembered a different Cade standing outside a courthouse in the rain. His borrowed suit had been too large. His shoes had been worn at the edges, yet he held her hands as if she were the only person in the world whose opinion mattered. "One day, I'll build something so strong nobody can ever look down on us," he had said. Now he stood beneath a bright stage light while the room looked down on her. Serena felt something painful settle into place. It was not surprise anymore. It was understanding. An older investor near the front lifted his hand. "Cade," he called, smiling, "you have thanked everyone except your wife. Is she joining you tonight?" The applause weakened. Brandt looked toward Cade. Ronan lowered his glass. Vex's smile became sharper. Cade gave a short laugh. "My wife?" Then he looked directly at Serena. The room followed his eyes. Every face turned toward her. "That marriage is ending," Cade said. "The papers will follow." The words struck harder than Serena expected, not because she had failed to imagine betrayal. Because some part of her still hoped he would see her and remember who he had been. She walked forward slowly. The guests opened a path. With each step she passed people whose companies had benefited from Aurelian contracts, people who would have stood to greet her if they had known her true position. Tonight, they watched her as if she were an unwanted visitor. Serena stopped beneath the edge of the stage. "Cade," she said quietly, "what are you doing?" He looked down at her. There was no apology in his face, only irritation that she had forced him to explain. "I'm ending the mistake I should have ended years ago." A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Vexa did not. She looked pleased. Serena's chest tightened, but her voice remained steady. "You asked me to come. I asked you here because you needed to hear it from me before my lawyers contact you," Cade replied. "Not through rumors." That answer revealed the full cruelty of the evening. The invitation had never been a chance to repair their marriage. It had been a summons to her own humiliation, and a public record Brandt could use to launch Cade's new image before the Aurelian signing. Cade raised the microphone again. "Serena is a poor orphan," he announced. "She has no money, no family name, no connections, and no place in the future I'm building." The room fell completely silent. Serena had told Cade about her parents during the first year of their relationship. She told him how it felt to move through childhood without a permanent home, and how deeply the word orphan wounded her when other children used it. He had once held her and promised never to use her past against her. Now he had chosen the deepest wound she trusted him with and opened it before a crowd. For 1 second, Serena was not a billionaire CEO standing among people who underestimated her. She was 9 years old again, listening to adults discuss where she would be sent next. Then she remembered her grandfather's leather folder. She remembered the board standing when she entered. She remembered every employee whose future depended on her decisions. She would not let Cade reduce her to the child she had survived being. Vexa stepped closer to the microphone. "Some women inspire powerful men," she said. "Others only remind them where they came from." Brandt chuckled loudly enough to encourage a few nervous smiles. Ronan did not laugh, but he did not defend Serena either. His silence placed him beside them. On the nearest glass table lay the printed reception program. Beneath Cade's photograph, Vexa was identified as his official partner. Serena's name appeared nowhere. Serena picked it up, folded it once, and placed it on the stage before Cade. The paper made almost no sound. Still, the gesture felt more final than an argument. Serena looked from Vexa to Cade. "Is this what you truly believe?" Cade's expression hardened. "It's what everyone can see." He meant her simple dress. Her lack of public status, her silence. He believed wealth had to announce itself to exist. Serena slowly reached for her wedding ring. Cade watched her remove it. Perhaps he expected her to throw it at him. Perhaps Vexa hoped she would cry, shout, or beg and complete the spectacle they had prepared. Serena did none of those things. She placed the ring on top of the folded program. The small metal sound traveled through the silent room. It sounded like the closing of a door. Then Serena turned and walked away. Leora reached her before the main exit opened. "Should I call security?" she asked under her breath. Serena kept moving. "No." "Then what do you need?" "Call Marcel." Outside, the cool night air struck Serena's face. She finally released the breath she had held since Cade called her an orphan. A black Aurelian vehicle waited at the curb. Inside the reception, the music started again. Cade raised a glass to the coming Aurelian sponsorship, and Vexa kissed his cheek. Applause returned, then grew louder as people chose comfort over conscience. Serena entered the vehicle. Leora sat beside her and called Marcel Dane, Serena's 45-year-old private attorney. He answered at once. "Serena," she looked through the tinted window at the glowing building. Somewhere inside, Cade was celebrating the future he believed she could never enter. "Begin a lawful review of Mercer's strategic," she said. "Start with every Aurelian-linked investment, every disclosure Cade signed, and every condition attached to the proposed sponsorship." Marcel's voice became careful. "Do you want a financial review or a legal one?" Serena watched Cade's image appear on the reception screens inside. "Both, and keep the marriage separate from the board's decision. If the agreement fails, it must fail on evidence. The vehicle pulled away from the curb. Behind her, the man who had erased their marriage raised another toast. He did not yet understand that Serena had asked her attorney to follow the one trail he could not afford anyone to find. The first document hit the table like a weapon. Marcel did not throw it. He simply placed it in front of Serena and turned it toward her. At the top of the page was Cade's signature. Beneath it was a certified disclosure declaring that the founder and personal guarantor was unmarried. Serena stared at the line while rain struck the tall windows of Marcel's private legal office. Less than an hour had passed since Cade called her a poor orphan before a room full of investors. She was still wearing the same black dress. Her hair remained neat, but the hand resting beside the file trembled once before she made it still. Her wedding ring was gone. The pale mark around her finger looked more painful than an open wound. Across from her, Marcel Dane, Serena's 45-year-old private attorney, had removed his jacket and rolled up his sleeves. Files covered the long conference table. Leora Venn, Serena's executive assistant, sat beside her with a tablet open, recording every document received and every question that required an answer. No one shouted. There were no threats, only paper, only signatures, only the cold shape of truth beginning to form. Marcel leaned forward. "I can protect your personal assets and make sure Aurelian follows its governance rules," he said, "but I need to know whether you want to protect Cade from the consequences of his own disclosures." Serena kept her eyes on his signature. For years, she had protected his pride by hiding how often she helped him. She protected his reputation by never correcting the story that he built his company alone. She protected his ambition even when it demanded more of her silence. That protection had become the room in which he learned to betray her. "I protected him for years," Serena said. "Now protect the truth." Marcel gave one slow nod. Then he opened the conference room door. Elias Crow, 53, was a forensic accountant hired by Marcel to trace financial misconduct, hidden debt, and false corporate claims. He had spent 25 years following money through complicated companies and had worked with Aurelian's legal team during several major investigations. Elias entered carrying 2 sealed boxes and a laptop. He placed the boxes on the table. "These are the records we can lawfully examine tonight," he said. Aurelian's internal sponsorship files, subsidiary investment records, public statements, documents Mercer Strategic supplied during due diligence, and lender confirmations authorized by Cade's signed verification clauses. Serena looked at the boxes. "How much is missing?" "Private account detail we cannot access without consent, a regulator, or a court order, but we have enough to test the representations he made to Aurelian." Elias sat and opened the first file. Review began with Cade's sponsorship applications. In the earliest forms, he described Mercer Strategic as a young firm seeking outside support. Later applications became more confident. Cade claimed the company's growth came from his leadership, private investors, and industry relationships. Serena's name appeared nowhere. That omission alone was not illegal. She had never held shares in Mercer Strategic, and Aurelian-linked investments had been made by separate companies under commercial agreements. But the latest founder disclosure went further. Because Cade personally guaranteed part of Mercer Strategic's debt, Aurelian asked whether a spouse existed who might hold marital claims, require notice, or effect enforcement against pledged assets. Cade certified that he was single. "He may argue he did not know you owned Aurelian," Leora said. "He did not know," Serena replied. Elias nodded. "That protects him from knowingly concealing your ownership. It does not excuse inventing a marital status because a wife complicated his financing story." He opened another document. This one was an investor presentation. A photograph of Cade appeared beside the words, "self-made, independent, free of undisclosed personal claims." Serena felt a bitter pressure in her chest. "Undisclosed," she repeated. Marcel's face hardened. The wording assured lenders and investors that no spouse could later challenge pledged shares or assets. The marriage was material because Cade chose to make it material. The next file contained a personal financial declaration. Cade listed Serena as a non-earning dependent in an older loan application, then removed her entirely from the newest one. Leora looked up sharply. First he told lenders she depended on him, then he said she did not exist. Elias nodded. Whichever version improved the transaction. Serena remembered Cade asking years earlier whether she needed money for groceries. She understood it as concern. Now she wondered whether he had been building a useful image even then. Marcel reached for another folder. These are event records and press materials supplied with the sponsorship campaign. Photographs showed Vexa standing beside Cade at dinners, award ceremonies, and private meetings. On several forms, she was identified as his official business partner. In 2 draft schedules, she was described as the woman helping shape Mercer Strategic's future. Serena's place had not merely been left empty, it had been reassigned. Elias continued. Expense summaries showed luxury hotels, private vehicles, clothing, jewelry, and travel marked as image development. Several payments had been approved by Ronan and directed through accounts connected to Vexa's consulting company. Leora's voice became quiet. Was company money paying for their relationship? We cannot conclude that from labels alone, Elias answered, but the spending appears excessive, some receipts lack a business purpose, and part of it was funded from restricted borrowing. That is enough for a compliance hold. Serena looked at the dates. Some payments were made during months when Cade told her he was too busy to return home. The room blurred for a moment. A memory rose without permission. Years earlier, before Cade left, he took Serena to a small restaurant after receiving his first serious contract. When the bill came, Serena reached for it. Cade stopped her. No, he said, smiling as he placed his card down. Let me do this. You paid last time. One day I'll be successful, he told her. And when I am, I'll never humiliate the people who stood by me. Serena laughed and squeezed his hand across the table. Back then, his pride felt gentle. It was the pride of a man who wanted to give. Somewhere along the way, it became the pride of a man who needed others to feel small. Across town, Cade and Vexa were still celebrating. They sat in a private lounge with Ronan and Brandt, drinking beneath low golden lights. Cade had loosened his tie. Vexa held his arm as if Serena's marriage had already become an old rumor. She walked away because she knows she cannot fight you, Vexa said. Cade smiled into his glass. She has no lawyer, no money, no family. What can she do? Ronan stared at the drink in his hand. He knew Mercer Strategic carried more debt than Cade admitted publicly. He also knew the company's next year depended on the Aurelian sponsorship closing, but Vexa was already discussing new expenses. She slid a transfer request toward him. The amount was large. The account description read, Executive Image and Market POSITIONING. Ronan frowned. Is not within the approved campaign budget. It will be covered after the contract closes, Vexa said. It has not closed. She leaned closer. Once the Aurelian deal closes, nobody will care. Cade gave Ronan a careless nod. Approve it in the morning. Ronan hesitated, then placed the request inside his folder instead of refusing it. Back in Marcel's office, Elias' laptop gave a sharp alert. He stopped speaking. The sound was small, but everyone at the table looked toward him. What is it? Marcel asked. Elias opened a lender verification response authorized through Cade's due diligence consent and read it twice. Then he pulled the laptop closer. This changes the risk. He turned the screen toward Serena. Mercer Strategic had borrowed heavily from several lenders. The financing schedule showed that Cade had presented the expected Aurelian sponsorship as a near-certain source of future revenue and liquidity. Marcel scanned the terms. There are acceleration and draw-stop clauses. Serena looked at him, meaning, if Aurelian refuses final approval, lenders can freeze undisbursed credit immediately. If the failed sponsorship causes a covenant breach or a material misrepresentation, some can demand repayment. Elias brought up Mercer Strategic's available cash and short-term obligations. The number was far lower than the debt. If the major lenders act together, he said, Mercer Strategic becomes insolvent within days and will likely have to seek bankruptcy protection. Serena did not smile. This was not a victory. It was proof that Cade had placed employees, investors, and an entire company beneath the weight of his pride. She looked again at the pending transfer, the loan schedule, and the sponsorship disclosure where her husband erased their marriage with one checked box. When is the signing? She asked. Marcel checked the board schedule. Friday morning. It was Wednesday night. The rain continued against the windows. On the table between them, Cade's future rested beneath Serena's hand, and Friday was much closer than he knew. Approve the transfer before the banks open. Cade's order cut through Mercer Strategic's conference room on Thursday morning. Ronan Pike, the company's 42-year-old chief financial officer, stood at the end of the table holding the payment request Vexa placed before him the night before. The amount was large enough to cover months of salaries, yet the document called it an expense for executive image and market positioning. The account is already subject to lender controls, Ronan warned. Moving more money now could raise questions. Cade did not look concerned. He stood before a wall-sized mirror, practicing the speech he would give at the Aurelian contract signing the next morning. The sponsorship had not been completed, but he behaved as though the money already belonged to him. Questions from whom? Cade asked. Lenders, auditors, possibly Aurelian. At the mention of Aurelian, Vexa Sterling looked up from the couch. The 31-year-old image consultant and Cade's secret lover wore a silk robe over her clothes, while a stylist arranged borrowed jewelry on the table beside her. The conference room was supposed to be used for Mercer Strategic's senior meetings. That morning, it had become a preparation suite for Cade and the woman he planned to present as his future. Aurelian has spent months preparing this deal, Vexa said. They are not going to cancel it over one campaign expense. Ronan studied her. She spoke as if she understood the oil company's decisions. In truth, she had never met its controlling owner and had dealt only with lower-level sponsorship officers. But inside Cade's circle, confidence had become stronger than facts. Ronan looked toward Brant Hollow, Vexa's 34-year-old image manager and trusted ally, who sat near the windows typing press statements on his laptop. Tell him, Ronan said, this spending makes no sense before the contract closes. Brant barely raised his eyes. The public story has to look complete before the cameras arrive. What public story? Brant turned his laptop around. The first prepared headline read, CADE Mercer enters new era with business and personal partner Vexa Sterling. A second document described Serena as a past personal complication with no role in Mercer's strategic success. Ronan's expression tightened. You cannot imply she is gone when Cade has not even filed for divorce. Brant closed the laptop halfway. We are controlling the story, not filing court papers. Cade finally turned from the mirror. Approve the transfer, Ronan. Ronan knew the company did not have enough unrestricted cash. He also knew Cade had borrowed against the expected Aurelian sponsorship. If the agreement closed, there might be enough new revenue to absorb the expense among larger project costs. If it did not close, none of them would have time to explain anything. Still, Ronan signed. His loyalty to Cade had never been built on friendship. It was built on position, salary, and the promise that Mercer Strategic was about to become too important to fail. Cade returned to his speech. Mercer Strategic was built by vision, discipline, and courage. Vexa shook her head. Too safe. She walked behind him and rested her hands on his shoulders. Say it was built by people who knew how to leave weakness behind. Cade met her eyes in the mirror, then he laughed. I like that. Across town, the same words sounded less impressive. Inside Aurelian's boardroom, no one was laughing. Marcel Dane, Serena's private attorney, stood beside a screen filled with documents. Serena sat at the head of the long table. Leora Venn, her executive assistant, occupied the chair beside her, sending instructions to Aurelian's communications, risk, and compliance teams. Graham Wexler, Aurelian's 61-year-old chairman, watched Marcel present the evidence gathered since the reception. The first page showed Cade's founder disclosure. Marital status, single. The next document showed that Cade, as personal guarantor, certified there was no spouse whose rights might affect pledged assets or require disclosure. Then Marcel displayed the investment history. 3 separate interventions had protected Mercer Strategic during its weakest years. Each passed through an Aurelian-linked entity. Each was approved through ordinary commercial review after Serena asked that Cade's company be considered. Graham's face darkened as the timeline grew. He stood before investors and said she gave him nothing, he asked. Leora opened a video recorded at the reception. Cade's voice filled the boardroom. Serena is a poor orphan. She has no money, no family name, no connections, and no place in the future I'm building. The recording stopped. Silence followed. Graham removed his glasses. I knew Edmund Vale for 30 years, he said. He built this company to protect his granddaughter. Now her husband is using the loss of her parents as entertainment. Serena's expression did not change, but her hands tightened beneath the table. Marcel continued. He showed Vexa's public positioning as Cade's official partner. He showed the questionable expense classifications. Then he placed Ronan's newly signed transfer request beside the loan schedule that depended on Aurelian's sponsorship. The transfer was approved this morning, Marcel said. They are still committing restricted funds against money they have not received. Graham looked towards Serena. We have enough to pause the signing and refer the application back to compliance. Naira Quill, 48, was the Aurelian board director responsible for corporate compliance and final sponsorship approval. She had worked with Serena for 9 years and was known for refusing any agreement that placed the company's reputation or capital at unreasonable risk. Naira closed the approval packet in front of her. "I have placed a formal hold on final authorization," she said. "The commercial committee's recommendation cannot become binding without board approval and Serena's controlling owner consent." She turned towards Serena. "Do you want us to cancel tomorrow's ceremony before Cade arrives?" Serena looked at the empty chair prepared for Cade. Cancelling in private would protect him from public humiliation. It would also allow Brandt to tell reporters that negotiations failed for ordinary reasons, while Cade continued claiming Serena had never mattered. "No," she said. "Let him arrive." Naira studied her carefully. "The press will be present because his team invited them. That is why the correction must be on the record." Serena's voice remained quiet. "He used witnesses to erase our marriage and misrepresent his company. The board should not create a spectacle, but it should correct material statements in the same room where he plans to repeat them." This was not anger without control. Serena had no intention of using Aurelian to punish Cade for ending their marriage. The board would act because he made false declarations, misled lenders, committed restricted funds before approval, and exposed Aurelian to financial and reputational risk. His cruelty had triggered the review. His dishonesty supplied the grounds. Marcel prepared a notice of non-approval and preservation letters in case the board rejected the agreement. Naira ordered the legally binding authorization packet kept locked until the board completed its questioning. Graham changed the signing agenda so Cade would confirm his representations before any final decision. Leora arranged for the verified documents to appear on the boardroom screen only after Graham announced the compliance review. Everyone around Serena had a clear role. For years, she carried Cade's problems alone because she believed protecting him was part of loving him. Now she was surrounded by people who understood that protecting her did not require hiding the truth. Later, when the board meeting ended, Serena remained near the windows with Leora. Below them, evening settled across the towers. "When I was young, people called me lucky because I inherited money," Serena said. "They never understood what came before it." Leora waited. "They did not see the funerals," Serena continued. "They did not see the relatives who became kind only after learning about the trust. Cade was the first person who made me feel chosen before he knew." "And now?" Leora asked. Serena looked at her bare ring finger. "Now I know he stayed loyal only while he believed I was beneath him." Her phone vibrated. A message from Cade appeared. "Don't embarrass yourself by showing up tomorrow. That room is for people who matter." Serena read it twice. There were no tears this time. She forwarded the message to Marcel. His reply came seconds later, preserved with the other communications. Serena lifted her eyes toward her reflection in the dark glass. She saw no abandoned orphan and no rejected wife. She saw the woman whose consent controlled whether Cade's contract could exist. "Tomorrow," she said, "he learns who owned the room before he walked into it." Far across town, Cade practiced his victory speech one final time. He had perfected every word, except the ones he would need when the board asked him to explain the truth. The boardroom doors flew open just as 20 cameras began flashing. Cade Mercer entered beneath a wall of white light. He did not pause or shield his eyes. He lifted his chin, smiled for the press, and walked into Aurelian Energy Holdings as though the building had been waiting for him. Vexa moved beside him in a white designer suit. Her arm was linked through his, and her expression carried the calm satisfaction of a woman arriving to claim something already promised. Behind them, Brandt raised one hand and directed the photographers. "Give them space near the company banner," he ordered. "Get Cade and Vexa together. Make sure the Aurelian logo is visible." Cameras clicked faster. A massive screen at the front of the room displayed Aurelian Energy Holdings times Mercer Strategic ISOUSES final approval and signing ceremony. The words shone above a long glass table lined with gold nameplates. Photographs of oil fields, refineries, shipping terminals, and large industrial sites covered the walls. Beyond the glass windows, the world looked small from the 88th floor. Cade looked at the room and saw victory. He saw investors who had doubted him. He saw reporters who would carry his name into every important business circle. He saw a contract that would turn Mercer Strategic from a troubled consulting firm into a company backed by one of the largest private oil empires in the industry. What he did not see was the formal compliance review waiting behind the ceremony he had designed for himself. Marcel sat near one end of the table with several sealed legal folders. Elias had his laptop open, ready to display verified records Mercer Strategic had supplied during due diligence. Naira stood near the final authorization case, which remained locked beneath her hand. Board members spoke in low voices, already aware that the ceremony could proceed only if Cade answered the compliance questions and the independent directors approved the agreement. And near the back of the room, seated quietly in a simple cream suit, was Serena. Cade saw her. His smile did not disappear. It became crueler. He leaned toward Vexa and said something too quiet for the cameras to hear. Vexa followed his eyes. When she noticed Serena, amusement moved across her face. Serena sat beside Leora, holding a plain folder on her lap. No diamonds, no visible security, no public sign that she controlled the company whose name filled the screen. To anyone who did not know the truth, she looked like an unwanted guest who had slipped into the wrong ceremony. That was exactly what Cade believed. He left the photographers and crossed the boardroom toward her. Several reporters watched him, expecting a polite greeting. Cade stopped in front of Serena and lowered his voice. "I told you not to embarrass yourself." Serena looked up at him calmly. His suit was new. His watch was expensive. His face had been carefully prepared for the cameras, but at that distance, she could still see the small line beside his mouth that appeared whenever he was afraid. He had worn the same expression years earlier when he waited to learn whether his first company loan had been approved. Back then, Serena had taken his hand. Now she kept both hands on her folder. "I'm not here for you," she said. Cade laughed under his breath. "That's obvious. You don't belong in rooms like this." The words were meant to make her feel small. Instead, Serena looked beyond him at the boardroom she had entered before he knew Aurelian existed. She remembered walking these halls after her grandfather's death. She had been young, frightened, and surrounded by directors who wondered whether she was strong enough to lead. She had learned every division of the company. She had sat through long meetings where older men spoke over her. She had studied contracts until midnight, visited remote industrial sites, and made decisions affecting thousands of employees. Years later, she still preferred simple clothes because power had never felt like something she needed to display. Cade had mistaken that choice for poverty. "I belong where the facts place me," she said. He frowned, as if the answer carried a meaning he could not reach. Before he could ask more, Vexa approached. She placed one hand on Cade's chest and turned him slightly toward the cameras. Then, while looking directly at Serena, she kissed his cheek. The display was slow and deliberate. A few photographers captured it. Vexa smiled afterward. "Some women don't understand when the story is over." Serena did not respond. Her silence disturbed Vexa more than anger would have. Vexa had expected pain. She wanted Serena to argue, cry, or create a scene that Brandt could use to prove she was unstable. Instead, Serena looked at her with the distant calm of someone examining evidence. Vexa's smile weakened for a moment. Cade placed his hand at Vexa's waist. "Come on," he said. "We have more important people to greet." He turned away from Serena. That simple movement carried years of history. Once, Cade had turned toward her whenever he was nervous. Before interviews, before loan meetings, before his first trip abroad, he looked for Serena's face. Now he wanted the room to believe she had never stood beside him. Serena watched him walk toward the investors. She felt no desire to call him back. The pain was still there, but it had changed shape. It was no longer the pain of waiting to be chosen. It was the pain of understanding that the choice had already been made. Beside her, Leora spoke softly. "Do you want me to ask the press to leave before the review begins?" Number Cade invited them to hear his claims. "They will record the correction too. Only the verified, non-confidential record Naira approved," Serena said. "Nothing more." Across the room, Ronan stood near a group of lenders, checking figures on his phone. His forehead shone beneath the lights. 3 messages from the company's bank had arrived since morning. One asked whether final board approval was still expected that day. Another requested a copy of the executed sponsorship before any remaining credit could be released. Ronan typed the same answer each time, signing proceeding as planned, but his fingers were not steady. He saw Elias near the board table and recognized him from past corporate investigations. Ronan's stomach tightened. "Why is that accountant here?" he asked Cade when he passed. Cade glanced toward Elias. "Probably standard compliance." "He is not standard compliance." Vexa heard them. "You are both imagining problems because the room is important," she said. "Smile before someone photographs you looking guilty." Ronan looked at her. The word guilty stayed between them longer than she intended. Brandt approached with printed talking points. The press will ask about Serena, he warned Cade. Use the prepared line. She is a past personal complication who has no role in the company. Cade nodded. Good. Brandt lowered his voice. Do not mention the marriage unless they ask directly. Cade smiled toward Serena. I have nothing to hide. At the front of the room, Naira checked the time. She had not placed the final contract on the table. In its place was an unsigned presentation copy with no legal force. The real authorization packet remained locked inside a case beside her chair. Cade did not notice the difference. His attention was on the cameras. Graham had not yet entered, and no formal part of the ceremony could begin without the chairman. Cade used the delay to move through the room, shaking hands and accepting praise. One investor told him, "This agreement changes everything." Cade answered, "It is only the beginning." Another asked whether Aurelian had offered him a larger leadership role. Cade smiled as though there were secrets he could not reveal. He had begun to believe that Aurelian's earlier introductions and the proposed sponsorship meant its leaders needed him. Serena knew the truth. Aurelian had never been betting on Cade. She had. Marcel leaned toward her. "We can end the ceremony before he makes another public statement." Serena watched Cade stand beneath the company logo with Vexa beside him. "No," she said, "he should have the chance to tell the truth. And if he does not," Serena looked at the sealed folder in Marcel's hands, "then the documents will." The boardroom doors opened again. Every director rose. The reporters turned. Graham entered with two senior board members behind him. His face was serious, his pace controlled. Cade stepped forward with both hands extended. "Chairman Wexler," he said warmly, "today is an honor." Graham shook his hand once, then his eyes moved past Cade. They settled on Serena. For the briefest moment, the hard line in Graham's face softened. He lowered his head in a small, respectful nod, not to the abandoned wife, not to an uninvited guest, to the owner of Aurelian Energy Holdings. Cade saw it. His hand remained suspended between them as Graham moved away. For the first time that morning, Cade's smile flickered. He glanced back at Serena, but she had already turned her attention to the screen. The ceremony had not yet begun. Still, something inside the room had quietly changed sides. "Before you sign, Mr. Mercer." Graham's voice stopped Cade's hand above the presentation copy. The cameras kept recording. For one sharp moment, every person in the boardroom stared at him, the investors expecting profits, the reporters waiting for a headline, and the directors who knew final approval remained unresolved. Graham's expression stayed professionally calm. "Aurelian requires the applicant to confirm its material representations before the board issues its decision. You may give the statement your team requested." The tension eased into scattered movement. Cade smiled as if the interruption were merely ceremonial, but Ronan did not laugh. From his seat near the lenders, Ronan watched Naira's hand remain on the locked authorization case. He also noticed Marcel open a clean legal pad as Aurelian's company secretary activated the official meeting recorder. Cade saw only the stage prepared for him. He stepped away from the table and moved toward the microphone. Brandt hurried to the side of the room, signaling the photographers to capture Cade beneath the Aurelian logo. Vexa took her place close to the front, where every camera could see her. Serena remained seated near the back. She had not moved since Graham entered. Cade glanced toward her. The small, respectful nod Graham had given her still troubled him, but he quickly pushed the thought aside. Serena had no money, no powerful relatives. No business position that could explain respect from Aurelian's chairman. Perhaps Graham simply felt sorry for her. That explanation pleased Cade because it allowed him to keep believing the world he had created. He adjusted the microphone. "Mercer Strategic was built from nothing," he began. The room became still. Cade spoke with the confidence of a man who had practiced each pause before a mirror. "We had no famous name, no powerful family standing behind us. No easy path into the energy industry." Serena listened without changing her expression. Every sentence erased another piece of the truth. Aurelian Connected Investors had opened his first major doors. Serena had approved emergency funding when his company could not make payroll. Graham had arranged introductions Cade later described as proof of his own influence. Cade had built something, but he had never built it alone. Mercer Strategic survived, Cade continued, because of people who refused to be held back by poverty, weakness, or emotional baggage. His eyes moved briefly toward Serena. The camera nearest the stage followed his gaze. Vexa smiled. Brandt clapped first. Several guests joined him, unsure whether the line was inspiring or cruel. The applause grew because no one wanted to be the person who remained silent while everyone else celebrated. Serena lowered her eyes to her bare ring finger. She remembered the night Cade received his first small contract. They had sat in a cheap restaurant under a flickering light, sharing one dessert because he could not afford two. He had been so proud that his hands shook when he showed her the agreement. "This is the beginning," he had said. Serena had not seen a poor man that night. She had seen the person she loved. Now Cade spoke about poverty as if it were a disease he had escaped. He did not understand that the woman he called weak had protected him from feeling poor long after he stopped deserving that protection. Cade lifted his chin. "I stand here today as proof that a man must sometimes cut away the people who cannot rise with him." This time, the applause was thinner. One board member stopped writing and looked directly at Graham. Marcel wrote the statement down word for word. Beside him, Naira leaned toward Graham. "He is repeating material claims from the application as public fact," she whispered. "That confirms the disclosure problem." Graham's jaw tightened. Aurelian's due diligence certifications and proposed sponsorship terms required truthful representations and conduct that would not expose Aurelian to reputational risk. Cade's speech was not merely cruel. He was using an Aurelian event to reinforce a misleading story about how Mercer Strategic had grown. Serena had insisted that Cade be allowed to speak. Now every word was closing the space around him. Cade continued by thanking Ronan for protecting every dollar and Brandt for building an honest public image. Ronan's face lost color. He thought of the transfer he had approved from the restricted image account. Brandt looked toward the press, pleased by the attention. He did not know that Aurelian's legal team already possessed copies of the false talking points he had prepared. Then Cade turned toward Vexa, and to the woman who understood that success requires sacrifice, "Thank you for standing beside me." Vexa rose. Cade offered her his hand and brought her onto the stage. Photographers moved closer. Serena heard several people whispering. Some clearly believed Vexa was Cade's wife. Others had seen Serena at the reception and understood that something was wrong. A reporter near the center raised her hand. "Mr. Mercer, may I ask a personal question?" Cade smiled. "Today you may ask anything. Reports say you recently separated from your wife. Did that situation affect this deal or Mercer Strategic's relationship with Aurelian?" The room tightened again. Brandt made a small cutting motion, warning Cade to use the prepared answer. Cade saw Serena watching him. For 1 second, she thought he might finally choose restraint. He did not. "The wife I am separating from had nothing to do with this company, this success, or this contract," he said. Serena remained still. Cade could have stopped there. Instead, the attention of the room fed something ugly inside him. "She was a poor orphan I helped out of pity." No one applauded. Even the cameras seemed louder in the silence that followed. The statement reached Serena with painful clarity. He had once known what that word meant to her. As a child, Serena had learned to read adult expressions before they spoke. Pity often came first, then curiosity, then the quiet calculation of what could be gained from the lonely granddaughter of a powerful man. Cade had been different, or she had believed he was. He had never looked at her with pity when they were young. He looked at her as if she were enough before he knew what she owned. That memory had kept Serena loyal through years of distance. Now Cade was publicly changing even that truth. He was claiming he had rescued her when she had secretly spent years rescuing him. Serena lowered her eyes, not because she was ashamed, because she no longer needed another answer. The man from the courthouse was gone. Marcel wrote the statement beneath the others, while the company secretary marked the exact time in the official transcript. Naira spoke quietly to Graham. "That is on record," Graham nodded. His expression was no longer simply angry. It carried the disappointment of a man who had watched Serena risk her heart for someone unworthy of it. Vexa moved closer to the microphone. She could have remained silent. Instead, she saw an opportunity to complete Serena's humiliation. "Cade built his company with discipline," Vexa said. "Not charity, not handouts, and certainly not with help from someone like her." She made a small movement toward Serena. The nearest camera captured it clearly. Brandt smiled, believing the moment would become a strong public image. The successful couple rejecting the unwanted woman from Cade's past. Ronan stared at Vexa as if he were finally seeing how dangerous she was. Her claim was false. He knew Mercer Strategic had survived through outside funds. He did not know Serena controlled the source, but he knew Cade's self-made story was a lie. A lender beside Ronan leaned closer. Is there something we should know about the financing? Ronan swallowed. No, the answer came too quickly. At the back of the room, Serena slowly raised her eyes. Vexer expected to see defeat. Instead, Serena's calm expression made her step away from the microphone. Cade returned to the signing table. Now, he said, smiling at Graham, I believe we are ready. Naira slid the non-binding presentation copy back in front of him. A gold pen rested beside it. Cade sat down. The cameras shifted toward his hand. He removed the cap and lowered the pen. Before it touched the page, Graham stood. Mr. Mercer, before the board can authorize any contract, Aurelian must correct several material statements made today and in your application. Cade stopped. The pen remained less than an inch above the signature line. False statements? He asked. The confidence in his voice was weaker now. Graham turned toward the massive screen. Behind Cade, the sponsorship banner disappeared. The screen went black. Then one word appeared in white letters. Ownership. Graham faced the room. Let's begin there. Cade looked back at Serena. For the first time, she was no longer the person in the room he understood least. She was the person everyone else appeared to be waiting for. The sponsorship banner vanished from the screen. The room lights dimmed automatically so the presentation could be seen, and the sudden change silenced the press. One camera stopped flashing. A phone slipped from someone's hand near the back and struck the floor. Then bright white letters filled the screen. AUALION Energy Holdings, corporate ownership structure. Cade stood beneath the screen with the gold signing pen still in his hand. What is this? He demanded. No one answered him immediately. The lights remained low while corporate names appeared one beneath another, holding companies connected to private trusts, subsidiaries linked to investment funds, and the lawful structure that had protected Aurelian's controlling owner for years. Cade stared at them without understanding. Vexer moved closer to him. Her confidence had vanished. Ronan wiped sweat from his forehead, while Brandt slowly lowered the press notes he had prepared. Graham stepped into the center of the room. For years, he said, Aurelian Energy Holdings has been privately controlled through a legal structure known as the Veil Trust. Cade released a nervous laugh. The sound did not match his face. What does that have to do with me? Graham looked directly at him. More than you understand. The screen changed again. A certified ownership extract appeared. Serena had authorized the board to disclose only what was necessary to correct the record. All unrelated trust details remained hidden. Controlling beneficiary of the Veil Trust, Serena Veil. Chief executive identified publicly as S. Veil, Serena Veil. Cade stopped breathing. Vexer's fingers slipped from his arm. Graham continued. The controlling beneficiary of the Veil Trust, controlling owner of Aurelian Energy Holdings, and chief executive officer publicly identified as S. Veil, is a photograph appeared. Serena. It was not the soft photograph Cade kept from the early years of their marriage. In this image, Serena stood in an oil facility wearing a hard hat and protective clothing. Senior executives surrounded her. Graham stood at one side. Naira stood at the other. The words beneath the image read, SENA Veil, controlling owner and chief executive officer. The room became completely silent. Then every Aurelian board member stood. Graham turned toward Serena. Madam CEO. Cade's face lost all color. Vexer shook her head slowly. No, she whispered. That's impossible. Serena rose from her chair. She did not smile. She did not lift her chin in victory or look toward the cameras. She simply stood. That quiet movement changed the meaning of everything inside the room. The simple cream suit no longer looked plain. Her silence no longer looked weak. The chair near the back no longer looked like a place given to an unwanted guest. Serena had chosen to sit there. She had chosen not to announce herself. She had given Cade the chance to correct his representations before the board ruled. Instead, he had repeated them because truth did not become weaker when spoken last. Cade looked at her as if he was seeing a stranger. Yet Serena had not changed. She was the same woman who had stood beside him outside the courthouse, the same woman who had encouraged him during failed interviews, the same woman who had answered his frightened call when Mercer Strategic could not make payroll. The difference was that Cade now knew her silence had never meant emptiness, it had meant restraint. Serena, he said, her name left his mouth without confidence. She remembered how he had spoken it when they were young. Back then, her name sounded like something precious to him. During the reception, it had sounded like a burden he wanted the world to forget. Now it sounded like danger. Marcel rose and approached the screen. The independent directors requested a factual review before deciding whether to authorize this sponsorship, he explained. Serena recused herself from their vote because of the marriage. What follows is limited to verified records Mercer Strategic supplied, Aurelian's own transactions, and information authorized for disclosure. The screen displayed a date from years earlier. Marcel began with Cade's overseas training. An Aurelian-funded professional foundation had circulated an advanced industry program to Mercer Strategic after Serena asked that smaller firms be included. Cade qualified through the competitive review, but Serena had quietly opened the door he later described as proof that powerful people naturally sought him out. The next record showed Mercer Strategic's first financial emergency. Aurelian-connected investors had provided commercial funding after Cade lost major support. The agreement had been reviewed independently. It required repayment and protected both companies, but Serena had been the person who asked the fund to consider him. The screen moved to the second crisis. A supplier had threatened to cancel Mercer Strategic's access to an important project. Graham had arranged an introduction after Serena requested help. Then came the payroll emergency. An Aurelian subsidiary had released funds 46 hours after Cade told Serena his company was about to collapse. Serena had approved the review. Serena had protected the employees. Serena had given Cade the chance to survive. Cade looked around the room. Some investors were no longer looking at him with admiration. They were studying him as if they had discovered the product they purchased was built on false information. Marcel displayed the founder and guarantor disclosure. The applicant certified that he was unmarried. Cade finally found his voice. "I didn't know she owned Aurelian." "That is not the question," Marcel replied. "You knew whether you were married." A low murmur moved through the press section. The screen showed Cade's signature beneath the word single. Another page explained why the information mattered. Because Cade personally guaranteed company debt and pledged assets, Aurelian required disclosure of any spouse whose marital rights might affect enforcement. He could argue that he did not know Serena owned Aurelian. He could not explain why one earlier loan file called her his dependent, while the newest certification erased her completely. Next came the investor materials calling him self-made and free of undisclosed personal claims. A reporter whispered he claimed the billionaire owner depended on him. The words spread through the room. Cade turned to Serena. "I didn't know," he repeated. "You hid this from me." Serena finally met his eyes. "That was the only true thing you said today." The answer was quiet. It cut deeper than shouting. "I hid my wealth," she continued. "I did not hide my loyalty. I did not hide our marriage, and I never forced you to lie." Cade opened his mouth, but nothing came. Naira took Marcel's place beside the screen. The ownership question is not the only compliance issue. Expense records appeared. Payments to Vex's consulting company had been charged to Mercer Strategic accounts supported by restricted borrowing and the expected Aurelian revenue. Hotel stays, clothing, private travel, jewelry, and luxury transportation had been labeled as image development, though the board had not yet determined which expenses were legitimate. Vexa stepped back. "I provided professional services," Naira faced her. "Then you will have an opportunity to explain each expense." The screen showed documents identifying Vexa as Cade's official business and personal partner, while Cade remained legally married and had not filed for divorce. Next came Brandt's press materials. His description of Serena as a past personal complication appeared in large letters. Brandt's face tightened. "That was a draft." "It was distributed to members of the press this morning," Naira answered. Then Ronan's transfer approval appeared. The time stamp showed he had authorized it only hours earlier despite the lender controls and the unsigned sponsorship. Ronan turned toward Cade. "You told me the contract was guaranteed." Cade snapped. "It was supposed to be." That single sentence revealed what the board already suspected. He had spent money against an agreement that had not been approved. He had treated Aurelian's future support as his private property. Vexa looked from Cade to the exits. The woman who had told him he could not build an empire beside an orphan was now searching for a way to escape the orphan's boardroom. Naira returned to the table and called the independent director's roll. One after another, each director voted to reject final approval. Serena did not vote. Her separate controlling owner consent could be considered only if the board first approved the transaction. Graham took the presentation copy from Cade and closed it. The sound was calm and final. Mercer Strategic made false declarations, used Aurelian's expected support to strengthen loan applications, and created unacceptable financial and reputational risk. Cade stepped forward. "Those are issues we can correct." Graham placed one hand over the closed folder. The board has refused authorization. There is no contract for Serena to approve. Panic finally broke through Cade's pride. You can't do that. Several cameras turned toward him. Serena looked at the man who had once promised to build a future where no one could look down on them. He had reached that future by standing on her sacrifices, then tried to remove her from it. We already did, she said. Cade's phone began vibrating in his pocket. Then Ronan's phone rang. Then another. Across the room, one of the lenders quietly stood and walked toward the door. The presentation folder had been closed for less than 10 seconds, but outside the boardroom, the first pieces of Cade's empire were already beginning to fall. Suspend the undrawn facilities and place the controlled accounts under review. The lead lender's representative spoke into his phone before Cade could reach him. He stood near the exit, his voice low but urgent, and his face had changed from polite interest to open alarm. Yes, he continued, stop the pending credit release, hold the restricted transfer under the account control agreement. Legal must review the failed sponsorship and the disclosure issues before anything else moves. Cade rushed toward him. You cannot freeze anything. The signing is still being discussed. The banker lowered his phone. There is no signed agreement. There will be. Behind Cade, Graham's hand remained on the closed presentation folder. No, Graham said, there will not. The boardroom no longer looked like a celebration. The cameras were still there. The gold nameplate still shone beneath the lights. The giant screen still displayed Serena's ownership records, but the excitement had vanished. Investors whispered to attorneys. Reporters moved closer to the table. Board members watched Cade with the hard patience of judges waiting for a defendant to understand the evidence against him. The sponsorship banner had disappeared. In its place were documents, timestamps, loan terms, and signatures. Naira stepped forward with the signed board resolution. For the record, she said, Aurelian Energy Holdings has rejected the proposed sponsorship of Mercer Strategic Resources. Cade turned toward Marcel. You represent Serena. You engineered this. I represent Serena personally, Marcel replied. The independent directors made the decision after she recused herself. Naira continued. No new capital, project access, or discretionary introductions will be provided under the proposed sponsorship. Existing commercial agreements with separate Aurelian-linked entities will remain governed by their own terms. Nothing is being cancelled retroactively. But there will be no sponsorship, no extension, and no executed agreement for your lenders to rely on. Each sentence removed another piece of Cade's future. Cade stared at the board as if they were changing rules that had already been promised to him. You approached us, he said. You wanted this partnership. Serena remained near the back of the room. No, she said. I wanted you to have an opportunity. Cade looked at her. The difference between those two things had never mattered to him before. Now it controlled whether his company survived. Elias turned his laptop toward the screen. A chart appeared showing Mercer Strategic's loans, available cash, unpaid expenses, and future obligations. At the time of this meeting, Elias explained, Mercer Strategic does not have enough available funds to satisfy its short-term debts. Ronan shifted in his chair. Cade snapped. We have incoming capital. You had expected capital, Elias corrected. Expected money is not owned money. The screen highlighted several loan agreements. Mercer Strategic borrowed heavily while presenting the Aurelian sponsorship as a near-certain source of future income. The lenders protected themselves with draw-stop, material adverse change, and acceleration clauses. The rejection allows them to halt unused credit immediately, and if their review confirms a covenant breach or misrepresentation, demand repayment. A reporter raised her voice. How much does Mercer Strategic owe? Elias did not reveal confidential numbers, far more than it can currently pay. That answer was enough. Two investors stood and left the table. Cade followed them with his eyes. Where are you going? One stopped. We were here because of Aurelian, not you. The word struck Cade harder than any insult Serena could have given him. He had believed investors followed his courage, his speeches, and his growing name. In truth, many had followed the company standing behind him, the company owned by the wife he had called useless. Cade's phone vibrated again, then again. The screen filled with notifications. Emergency lender conference requested. Investor commitment withdrawn. Emergency board meeting called. Pending transfer suspended. Media inquiry, false disclosure allegations. He rejected one call only for another to appear. Ronan's phone rang at the same time. He answered and listened for several seconds. What do you mean the account is restricted? Vexer moved toward him. Which account? Ronan covered the phone and lowered his voice. The restricted marketing account. The bank has stopped the transfer. Vexer's face tightened. That money was approved. By us, Ronan answered. Not by the bank. Cade grabbed Ronan's shoulder. Tell them the Aurelian decision is temporary. Ronan pulled away. It is not temporary. The words came out before he could soften them. Silence opened between the two men. For years, Ronan had encouraged Cade's confidence because Cade's success protected his own position. Now that the company was falling, loyalty had become a dangerous expense. The press moved closer. Questions came from every direction. Mr. Mercer, did you lie about being unmarried? Did you misrepresent your wife's financial position? Did you use false personal information to influence investors? Were borrowed funds spent on Ms. Sterling's lifestyle? Did you publicly attack the owner of the company considering your sponsorship? Cade raised both hands. This is a private marital dispute being turned into a corporate attack. Marcel's expression remained calm. No. Your marriage became a corporate issue when you gave conflicting marital information in official financing and due diligence declarations. Cade looked toward Serena as if expecting her to stop the questions. She did not. He remembered another moment years earlier when a lender had challenged his first business plan. Cade had become angry and defensive. Serena had taken him outside and helped him rebuild every weak number before the next meeting. She had always made the room safer for him. Now she allowed the room to see him clearly. Vexer stepped away from the signing table. I was only a consultant, she announced. Naira opened another document. You signed 4 statements identifying yourself as Mercer Strategic's official partner. That was branding language. You also approved expense requests and participated in investor presentations. I acted on information Cade gave me. Cade turned toward her. Vexer. She avoided his eyes. Brant closed his laptop and moved toward the press section. Marcel stopped him with one sentence. A litigation hold now covers the media files you distributed. Brant froze. I only managed public messaging. You created false statements describing a legal wife as a past complication, Marcel said. Cade approved every word. Cade stared at him. The allies who had laughed during Serena's humiliation were no longer a united circle. They were separate people building separate defenses. Ronan stood. I acted under Cade's direction. Cade looked at him in disbelief. You signed the transfers because you ordered them. You knew the company's position. You told me the contract was guaranteed. Their voices rose, but Serena heard only the truth beneath them. Their loyalty had never been real. Money had held them together. Fear was pulling them apart. Cade reached for Vexer's arm. We need to leave and talk. She removed his hand. The movement was quick, almost disgusted. Do not touch me while cameras are recording. Hours earlier, she had kissed his cheek to humiliate Serena. Now she would not let him stand beside her during his fall. Cade looked across the room. Brant was blaming him. Ronan was blaming him. Vexer was distancing herself. Investors were leaving. Lenders were restricting accounts and facilities. And Serena, the woman he believed had nobody, stood surrounded by attorneys, directors, and evidence. He walked toward her. His steps were slower now. Serena, he said. She looked at him without warmth or hatred. Please, we're married. A painful memory passed through her. At the reception, Cade had laughed when someone asked about his wife. On the application, he had called himself single. Before the cameras, he had called her a poor orphan he helped out of pity. Now marriage mattered because it was the last shield he had left. You remembered that too late, Serena said. Cade's face tightened. You hid who you were. I hid money, she replied. You hid your character. Marcel approached carrying a sealed envelope. He handed it to Cade. What is this? Legal notices, Marcel said. Cade tore it open. The first document was a courtesy copy of Serena's divorce petition, filed the previous day after Marcel preserved evidence of Cade's public abandonment and apparent infidelity. Formal service would proceed under the court's rules. The marriage was not yet legally ended, but Cade could no longer pretend no action had begun. The second document preserved Serena's civil claims arising from his false public statements. Third notified Mercer Strategic of an independent investigation into suspected misrepresentations and misuse of restricted funds. The final notice required preservation of records and warned that lenders or a court could restrict company assets if improper transfers were proved. Cade's knees weakened. He reached for the edge of the table. This will destroy me. Serena's expression did not change. No, Cade, these papers only describe what you already did. He lowered his head. For the first time since entering the room, he had no speech, no lie, and no person willing to applaud him. Then Marcel's tablet chimed. "There is one final development," he said. Cade slowly raised his eyes. The secure notice had come from Mercer Strategic's outside counsel. Its independent directors had convened an emergency meeting after receiving the lender alerts and Aurelian's rejection notice. Ronan's face suggested Cade was not the only person who feared what they had decided. "Mercer Strategic's board has suspended you as chief executive officer, effective immediately." Marcel read the verified notice from the company's outside counsel. The decision struck Cade harder than the cancelled contract. Cade gripped the edge of the glass table. "What did you say?" Marcel turned the tablet toward him. "Your independent directors held an emergency vote after the lenders issued their alerts, and Aurelian transmitted its rejection notice with copies of the representations your company supplied. They have suspended you while an outside investigation is conducted." Cade turned toward Ronan. "You knew about this?" Ronan moved away from him. "The directors contacted me after the lenders restricted the facilities." "You work for me." "I work for Mercer Strategic," Ronan replied. Only hours earlier, Ronan had followed Cade's orders without question. Cade had diluted his ownership during repeated funding rounds, and investor-appointed directors now controlled the board vote. Ronan spoke as if their loyalty had never existed. Cade looked around the boardroom for someone willing to defend him. Brandt had closed his laptop and stepped toward the press. Vexa stood near the side exit, careful to keep several feet between herself and Cade. The investors who had applauded his arrival were either leaving or speaking quietly with their attorneys. Above them, workers had begun removing the signing banner. One side came loose first. The words Mercer Strategic RSOUSES folded inward and disappeared behind the fabric. Cade stood beneath the falling banner like a king, watching his flag lowered. Graham returned to the head of the table. "Mercer Strategic Resources is disqualified from this Aurelian sponsorship process, effective immediately." Naira placed the board's final resolution beside him. "All related compliance findings will be referred to council and regulators where necessary," she said. "Any criminal, civil, or corporate consequences will be decided through the proper process." There was no dramatic order to arrest Cade, no instant seizure of everything he owned. The truth was more realistic and more dangerous. Lenders would examine his loans, investors would review his statements, directors would inspect every transfer, attorneys would follow the money Vexa and Ronan had approved. One lie had led to another, and now each one had a document attached to it. Cade's destruction would not come from Serena shouting at him. It would come from signatures he had placed on paper while believing no one powerful would ever question him. Reporters crowded closer. Vexa moved toward the side exit. A photographer noticed her. "Ms. Sterling, were you aware Mr. Mercer was married when you presented yourself as his future personal partner?" Vexa stopped. Another reporter stepped in front of her. "Did company funds pay for your clothing and travel? Did you help prepare statements describing Serena Vale as a personal complication? Were you involved in the decision to hide Mr. Mercer's marriage from investors?" Vexa's polished expression cracked. "I was hired as a consultant," she said. "Cade controlled the company." Brandt stared at her. "You approved the strategy. I approved nothing illegal. You told me what story to create." Vexa turned toward him sharply. "You were paid to manage the press." Brandt lifted both hands. "I am not taking responsibility for your relationship." A few hours earlier, they had worked together to present Vexa as the woman beside Cade's throne. Now neither wanted to stand beside the other. Vexa looked toward Ronan. "You signed the expenses, explain that they were approved." Ronan shook his head. "I will explain everything to investigators, then tell them Cade ordered it." Cade stared at all three of them. "You were happy to spend the money." No one answered. Their silence was different from the silence at Serena's humiliation. Then they had remained quiet because they believed Cade was powerful. Now they were quiet because his power was gone. Cade turned away from them and saw Serena near the boardroom doors. Leora stood beside her. Marcel held the remaining legal files. Neither of them rushed Serena or tried to pull her away. They simply waited. Serena was not alone. She had never been as alone as Cade believed. He approached her slowly. The cameras followed, but for once he did not seem aware of them. "I made a mistake," he said. His voice broke. Serena studied the man before her. His expensive suit was still perfect. His watch still shone under the lights, yet the confidence that had filled the room when he arrived was gone. For a moment, she saw the young man outside the courthouse. She saw wet hair, a borrowed suit, and hopeful eyes. She remembered the small restaurant where he had refused to let her pay for dinner. "When I become successful," he had told her, "I'll never humiliate the people who stood by me." She had believed that promise because Cade seemed ashamed of poverty, not ashamed of her. But his fear of being looked down on had grown into a need to look down on someone else. Serena had become the easiest target because he thought she would always forgive him. "No, Cade," she said, "you made a pattern." He flinched. "I was under pressure. You called yourself single before the pressure. I didn't know who you were. You knew I was your wife." Cade lowered his voice. "If you had told me about Aurelian, none of this would have happened." Serena looked at him with quiet sadness. "That is exactly why I never told you." He stared at her. She continued, "You believe knowing I was rich would have made you loyal, but loyalty that depends on wealth is not loyalty. I loved you. You loved being loved by me." The difference silenced him. Serena did not feel the victory she once imagined justice might bring. She felt grief for the years she had spent protecting a man who saw her patience as permission, but beneath the grief was something new: freedom. Cade could no longer use her hope against her. He could no longer make her wait for the man he had chosen not to be. Serena stepped past him. He did not try to stop her again. Within days, Mercer Strategic entered bankruptcy protection because it could not satisfy the lenders or replace the stopped credit. Over the following months, the company's board dismissed Cade permanently after an outside audit found that he had committed restricted funds while presenting the unsigned Aurelian contract as effectively certain. Several investors filed civil claims. Because Cade had personally guaranteed major loans, the company's failure followed him home. After secured assets were sold through the bankruptcy process and lenders pursued the guarantees, Cade filed for personal bankruptcy too. His luxury apartment had been leased through a corporate account, so he was forced to leave when the company stopped paying. The expensive car disappeared next, then his assistants, then the friends who once crowded around his table. His calls went unanswered. His name appeared in headlines not as the self-made leader he wanted to become, but as a warning about pride, false disclosures, and borrowed success. Vexa ended all contact with him. Her consulting firm lost clients after the expense records and false media strategy became public. Brandt released a statement blaming both Cade and Vexa, but his reputation also suffered because his own files proved he had helped create the deception. Ronan cooperated with investigators in an attempt to protect himself. He still faced consequences for approving transfers he knew were questionable. They had all helped build the lie. None of them escaped untouched when it collapsed. Serena did not give interviews about Cade. She did not celebrate his bankruptcy. At her request, Aurelian's human resources team opened existing vacancies to qualified Mercer employees through an ordinary competitive process, so innocent staff were not punished for Cade's choices. Then Serena returned to work. Months later, she stood before the board with a new proposal. She created the Veil Pathway Foundation, a program that would help foster youth and young adults without families study business, finance, and law. The foundation offered education, mentorship, and legal protection to people who had learned too early how easily the world could underestimate someone who stood alone. The insult Cade had used to break Serena became the reason other young people would receive a future. On the day the foundation opened, Serena left Aurelian through the same lobby where reporters had surrounded Cade and Vexa. Leora walked beside her. Marcel waited near the black company vehicle. The old wedding ring rested in Serena's palm. She had carried it since the reception, not because she wanted Cade back, but because she had not decided what the ring meant anymore. Once, it represented a promise. Then it became evidence of what she had lost. Now it was only a piece of metal connected to a closed part of her life. Marcel opened the car door. Serena placed the ring inside a small envelope. Across the front, she wrote 2 words, closed file. She handed the envelope to Marcel. Store it with the completed divorce records. He accepted it without asking whether she was certain. Serena entered the car. She did not look back at the tower, the reporters, or the life Cade had destroyed with his own choices. Cade thought Serena was poor because she never used wealth to prove her worth. He thought she was weak because she loved quietly. He thought she had nothing because she never bragged about what she owned. But Serena had never needed to stand beside his empire. His empire had been standing on hers. As the vehicle moved away, Leora handed Serena the first application submitted to the Veil Pathway Foundation. On the page was a photograph of a frightened teenage girl with no parents, no money, and no idea that someone powerful had already chosen to believe in her. Serena opened the file. Her marriage had ended, but the part of her story that would matter most was only beginning.